democracy only works if you maintain your faith in other people's capacity to change. And not only is that the foundation of the democratic order, you also have to summon it in order to actually do it. If we are to tap other people's better angels, you first have to see them. And sometimes that means, getting through the clouds. Sometimes it means really squinting your eyes to find it, but you have to find it.
All right. Welcome to the Expect Chaos podcast.
We are so excited to have our guest today, Congresswoman Sarah McBride. She's the at-large representative from the fabulous state of Delaware. And we could probably spend the entire podcast just in your intro talking about all the cool things you've done, but we really want to be respectful of your time and just jump right in, because I'm confident that anything and everything we would say in the intro is going to come out in the podcast recording. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. It's wonderful to be here.
Yay.
I feel right at home in any space that says expect chaos.
It's so funny. We did that because we were, our first episode, we recorded and we're just kind of doing the hey, here's where we are and here's where we're going. And then the AI clips of it, the AI will clip it up, and it made a clip that said, expect chaos. And we were talking to Ron Barry, and he's like, why don't you just rename your podcast that? That's amazing.
He was like, think of the merch. I was like, well,
yes,
that actually sounds great. So we're going to go ahead and do that. So 48 hours after we launched our first episode, we named the podcast in true Expect Chaos fashion. So here we are. What are we, 5, 6?
What you're telling me is that AI named your podcast.
I mean, it was, the AI interpretation was, we have ADHD. So I actually said expect chaos. I was like, we have ADHD, so expect chaos. And it did the header, expect chaos. I was like, that's amazing.
Perfect. So there it is. Nailed it.
Yeah, exactly. Crushed it. But thank you so much for being with us. And this question, it's funny to ask you this because I know you very well and I've had the privilege of knowing you for a while. But just tell us a little bit about your life before you ran for office and got into public service, and how those experiences drove you to actually want to get in the arena, because it is a scary place to be sometimes.
It is a scary place to be, and I think it's a particularly scary place to be, but one that is so vital right now, and one that is still, for all of the reasons for fear, the place where you have the most capacity to do good. And I think for me, my journey to running for office, my journey to public office, my journey to politics itself really started, as you know well, Molly, when I was young. When I was really young, I wanted to be an architect. I still think architecture is the most beautiful form of art that exists. And I used to read books about different buildings around the world to admire the architecture, and I stumbled across these books about the Capitol and the White House. And as I started reading them, I began to marvel not just at the beauty of the buildings, but at the history that occurred within their walls, because at that point, I was buried deep in the closet. I was facing really what I can only describe as a crisis of hope. And in that crisis of hope, I was desperate for solutions. I was desperate for examples of our world becoming kinder and more inclusive, because I was realizing that there was something about me, my trans identity, that this world was not ready for. And in many ways, this world was built to keep me from realizing and living. And if I did, pursuing happiness and fulfillment and community. And I found hope as I read those books, because I realized that the through line of every chapter was the story of advocates, activists, and a handful of courageous and effective elected officials working together to right the wrongs of our past and to bring people from the shadows and the margins of society into the circle of opportunity. And so I found hope in that story. I found hope in politics. And I got involved at a young age, volunteering and then eventually interning and then working on campaigns here in Delaware, many of which brought me side by side with you. And it also resulted, once I finally did come out, in a path that led me to advocacy, first here in Delaware and then eventually at the Human Rights Campaign. But it really wasn't until the 2014, 2015, 2016, 2017 period that I decided that eventually I did want to run for office, and that there was possibilities for someone like me to run for office. And in 2014, I we'll probably talk about this more. I was the caregiver to my husband Andy during his battle with cancer, and that lit a fire under my ass with both a sense of urgency for my own life and for change, and also a deep passion for healthcare policy and workplace benefits that allow people to grapple with the challenges of life. In 2017, I saw Danica Rome, an out trans person in Virginia, get elected to the state legislature in a purple district. And I saw that people like me could have a seat at the table. And so those sort of collective experiences and that journey back to hope that I experienced throughout the course of my life ultimately led me to decide in 2019 to run for my state Senate seat here in Wilmington. And as they say, the rest is history.
As you were having volunteered and worked on campaigns, and I say this as someone who has largely worked my entire career behind the scenes in politics. So I've always had the sort of behind the curtain view. And for me personally, I've always been like, oh, I don't know if I would ever want to do this. I put myself out there in that way. Did you have any hesitancy about jumping into the arena or after having seen what you saw behind the scenes, or were you just like, head full of steam, ready to go, and you just got up there and did it?
I think I benefited from being very, very junior on the campaigns that I actually worked on. I think if I had an even closer view of what it was like to be a candidate, I probably would have had more hesitation than I did in 2019 when I ran. It- I would say my hesitation in 2019, I was pretty confident that this is what I wanted to do and that this was the right thing for me to do. I ended up loving actually running for the state Senate. I loved running for the state Senate. I loved serving in the state Senate. It's like this like Goldilocks spot where you can have an impact, where you actually get, as an elected official, your hands dirty with policy, right? You're the one negotiating the policy in a way that when you're higher up, there's just a lot more staff work that happens. But I loved running for the state Senate because I loved knocking on doors. I'm an introvert, and I thought this is going to be a challenge, but there was just something about knocking on doors that was bizarrely organic. And I know it's surprising because it feels in a way that's not true when I was knocking on doors for other people. But when I was knocking on doors for myself, it is an inherently inorganic experience, right? You're knocking on the door of a stranger, but the conversations ended up being really organic because I would go in and I would introduce myself. I'd explain, why I was there, give a 2-sentence spiel, and then ask them what's top of mind for them. And if they didn't want to talk about anything, great. They led the conversation. They didn't want to talk about anything. I'd give them my information, let them know I was there at any point if they had follow-up questions. But if they did want to talk about something, the conversations would just flow. And I was always surprised how many people were willing to be vulnerable with me as I knocked on their door as a stranger. And that was just really gratifying. I did have hesitation when I decided to explore running for Congress. I had gotten some warnings from folks who had their tentacles in the far right that there would be a lot of risk for me personally if I ran for Congress. Fortunately, that didn't materialize in the campaign and even remotely the way that they had warned me, but there was early on a lot of speculation about that. And there was a period of time where I went, you know, do I want to be in Congress more than I want to live?
Mhm.
Which is a wild, like, I mean, that is just a choice that's really mind blowing when you kind of sit with it and unpack it. That
It
for
is.
some people, like it is real, like personal safety, family safety is legitimately at risk for serving the public.
I mean, it's one of the most corrosive forces in our politics right now, if not the most corrosive, is the increased risk of violence and the not only the increased risk, but a sort of normalization that has occurred for a couple of reasons, including an increased sort of crisis of hope that people have in politics and in persuasion, in peaceful, nonviolent persuasion as even possible, right? We go online and we see these very extreme examples of the far left and the far right, and it can lead people just into thinking, well, that's 100% of the content, so this entire country must be so divided. You're either 100% with me or 100% against me, that there's no way to have a national dialogue. There's no way to persuade people. And for some people, they leave that feeling like the only way to bring about the change they believe in is through force. And that is, first of all, that's completely unacceptable no matter what the circumstances are. But it's also fortunately not rooted in reality. We are not as divided as the algorithms make it seem. And that's one of the blessings being in elected office that I feel like I experience, is that I get a front row seat to everyone in every corner of this state, people in Washington. I know we have real disagreements, but we're not there are people who are doom posters, and that is 5% of the population on either end. Most people are either not online or they're doom scrollers. They're not posting about politics, and they fall somewhere in the middle. And those people are people that you can have a conversation with. But I decided, as I grappled with those sort of existential questions before really deciding to run, and I swear to God, I almost didn't. You guys know in Delaware, I think it was sort of presumed that I was going to do this. There was a moment in the 2 weeks leading up to when I announced, where I actually opened my computer and started to write a statement saying that I wasn't going to run. And two things happened in that moment. One is I called someone who had been encouraging me on behalf of a number of members of Congress to run, and just got that little extra, you won't be alone, we'll be in your corner. But then I also just decided that if I didn't run because I was scared, if I didn't run because I was worried about my safety, then the people who were trying to intimidate me out of running would win.
Yeah.
And I wasn't willing to let them win.
That reminds me. So one of the ways our paths crossed is former boss and mentor and friend of ours, former Attorney General Beau Biden. And I remember having a conversation with him, being on the staff side and just seeing, because I don't think people, as a staff person, it's really hard work. But then you have this perspective of like, I'm with them, even if it's 90% of the time, there's still a 10%, like you all have just the expectations and the stakes and the time that people expect elected officials to pour in is actually really unfair, frankly, and unrealistic in some aspects, where it's like, put your life on the line, sometimes both literally or at least metaphorically, and that the expectation is you are around 24/7. And anyway, I remember talking to him and I said, how do you do this? How do you do it? And he said exactly what you said. When it gets really hard, I tell myself that if I step back, who steps in? And looking around at, him, he's very, very positive, very kind, very funny, definitely not a saint, but was very kind and charitable to people of all walks of life. And he said, it's not, it's not that the people who would run are bad or anything, but just they're not going to fight for the things I care about the same way that I will. And I can't look in the mirror and say that I walked away or I stepped back out of convenience or comfort. And then what do I say to the people that I made a commitment to fight for those things? And so, he passed away during that time period. He passed away in 2015, and actually, this episode's going to come out on his birthday, which is
Oh,
a happy birthday, Bo. He passed away during that time. You mentioned you lost your husband. You are not a stranger to grief, and I'm curious how that has impacted your ability to look fear in the eye, your ability to connect with people. How have you been able to translate that pain into the work that you've done since those moments in your life where it would have knocked anyone to their knees and understandably left them not able to get back up,
yeah.
potentially ever?
I think first of all, I think people are much more perseverant than they think they are, right? They have a reservoir. People have a reservoir of courage and strength that they might not know exists until it's summoned. And you know, Andy's illness was, I mean, being his caregiver and watching him go through that. I mean, I had it easy compared to him, but it was the hardest thing that I had ever done in my life. I mean, it was the most formative experience in my life. And from the start, Andy, who was an attorney working to actually implement the Affordable Care Act and secure non-discrimination protections within the regulations on the Affordable Care Act, so that everyone could get health care regardless of who they are, how they identify, who they love. From the very start of his treatment, which initially we thought and we hoped would result in him being cured and living a long life of 12-hour surgery that left him having to relearn how to talk, how to eat, how to breathe, 6 weeks of radiation and chemotherapy. From the very start of that process, we knew how lucky we were. We knew how lucky he was to have health insurance that would allow him to get care that would hopefully save his life. We knew how lucky we were to have flexibility with our jobs that allowed him to focus on the full-time job of getting care and me to be there to care for him, which throughout much of that experience was a full-time job for me. And even when his cancer spread to his lungs and it became terminal, we still knew how lucky we were. And up until his last breath, he knew how lucky he was. And part of my motivation to run for office was because I just do not think that in the wealthiest, most developed nation on earth, that time and that ability to get care should be a matter of luck. And I think that for me, that knowledge of my own luck, the luck of the family I'm born into, the luck of the community that I live in, the luck of the state that I live in, the luck of the country that I was born in, um, that luck, the layers of support that are a byproduct of that luck, haven't made every part of my life easy, but have made it a lot easier than a lot of other people have it. And that for me is a motivation. But I think even more profoundly in this moment, I've been thinking a lot about the final month of Andy's life. And in that last month, my brother, who's a radiation oncologist in New York, who's watched a lot of people, including younger people, pass away, he said to me, "This is going to be incredibly difficult, but that I should take stock in the acts of amazing grace that would fill my life." And that grace, the miracles, were truly everywhere. From the kindness of friends and family who organized a wedding for us in 5 days. We decided to get married when he got the terminal diagnosis. They organized a wedding for us in 5 days, to Andy surviving long enough to make it to the wedding, to the love that encircled Andy around his bedside 5 days after our wedding as he passed away. someone said, who had been both at the wedding and by his bedside when he died, that the wedding was the most tragic, beautiful thing that they had ever experienced. And what was essentially a vigil for days around Andy in the hospital as he passed away was the most beautiful, tragic thing that they had ever experienced. And that month for me, and that single comment from my brother, just sort of left me with grace colored glasses. Like, I cannot, throughout the rest of my life since then, I cannot help but see the grace that exists. That hope as an emotion only makes sense in the face of hardship.
So true.
And in this moment, when it feels so dark in our country and in our politics, in a way that feels so heavy for people, and rightfully so, I still can't help but see the glimmers of hope, the grace. And one of the things that I am grateful for right now, because there's a lot that we can be scared by and we should be outraged by. But one thing that I am grateful that I am seeing right now is that while social media can sometimes leave us feeling like empathy is extinct, what we have seen over the last couple of weeks in this country since the murder of Renee Good and Alex Preddy is that empathy is not extinct, that the disinformation machine is not impenetrable, and that we can still tap people's better angels if we are willing to see them and engage with them. And that is hope and grace for me in this moment, that I think it's not everything, but it's certainly not nothing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be very easy for people to wonder, how you or people like you in elective office can continue to try to move forward and get things done in a climate where it feels like there is no grace, right? Or very little grace. And you end up on a lot of people, anyone that puts themselves out in the public ends up on the receiving end of some pretty vile stuff, things that, attacks on what you believe and what you're advocating for.
Very personal ones too. Like not attacking, well, how could you hold this policy, but like who you are and what you care about and your values and, things that are just deeply, there's no other way to say it. It's just deeply personal, and it's meant to hurt and to harm, sadly, in a lot of cases.
So then, you have to get in the room, obviously, with people who may have pointed, some of these attacks. That you get in the room with people who fundamentally believe different things than you do. And, I think that going back to what you were saying before about the persuading, right? Like being able to hold on to this idea that we can still persuade people, and it doesn't have to come to violence or even verbal violence in some cases. So how do you, I mean, you have a reputation for getting things done in general. So like, how do you get into those rooms with people who fundamentally are very different, believe different things? And how do you actually get things done? I know this was a while back, but you passed paid family leave in Delaware and
it went into effect on the first of this year.
I know, how exciting. So we start to see the real impact of those things, right? That hard work. And paid family leave in a lot of places around the country is not an easy issue, right? And I think, intellectually, I think we could say, oh, that should be a slam dunk, right? Like that's something that we should have. Does not often govern what ends up happening. But you got it done. What is the formula, or what is your approach to getting in these rooms, having hard conversations, working through some of these things and applying grace in these areas?
Well, I think even very personal disagreements, and I'm not saying this as a description of every interaction, everything that's said to me or about me or about issues that are deeply personal to me. Um, but I will just start by saying that I think we have to get back into a space where we actually appreciate the beauty that comes from a pluralistic society where people do have real disagreements, and that those disagreements, sometimes they're not going to feel great. Sometimes there might even be pain in that disagreement, hurt, disappointment. But the fact that we are even free to have that disagreement is a beautiful thing. And the fact that there is that kind of diversity of experience that then leads to diversity of thought is also in and of itself a beautiful thing. It doesn't always, beautiful things don't always produce beautiful actions, but beautiful things, but it is beautiful nonetheless. It is a reflection of the tapestry of humanity that I think we should marvel at in its macro sense. Um, you know, I I think principles only matter when you're willing to abide by them, even when you have every reason to seemingly altruistically give up on them, right? When people when people say or do things that lead you to say, I'm just going to give up on you. And look, I'm not saying expend the same amount of energy trying to convert everyone, right? Inevitably, you're going to have a third of people who just disagree with you, and you're never going to convince them of the rightness of your perspective. But I do believe that central to my principles is the notion that every single person is more than their worst action, more than their worst belief, that every person has inherent dignity, and that the foundational way of affirming anyone's dignity is to show them the respect of trying to hear them, trying to understand them. And that, I believe, is not only a principle, I also think it's pragmatic. Because when you have a position and you go into places where people disagree with you, one, you might gain unlikely allies. But two, you're also going to take some of the wind out of the sails of their opposition, because a lot of that opposition is rooted in the fear that you haven't considered or weighed their concerns. And if you give people the time and the respect of showing up and listening to them and talking through their concerns, they might not ultimately agree with you. They might still oppose you, but the passion of their opposition might be dulled by the fact that they now know that you are making a decision and you are not ignorant to their concerns.
Or dismissive of people feeling completely just like,
yes,
get out of here. You're not worth listening to.
Exactly. And so they not only do they have the passion of their opposition because they haven't had their concern listened to, and they wonder whether you're even aware of their concern, but they also feel disrespected, and so they're angry toward you. And so they're also going to be more passionate in their opposition because now it's personal. And so I believe that part of the reason why we're able to get paid leave done in Delaware, when I started, a lot of people, including in our own party, said never going to happen, or if it does, it'll take 10 years. We love to
at the
marinate.
highest levels.
At the high, like, we're going to marinate on that issue for 10 years, and then maybe we'll do it. Part of the reason why it got done is because I hustled. And I
was going to say, you're not going to toot your own horn, but you worked your ass off going into any and every space where somebody was saying, we can't do this because ... And you're like, awesome. I would love to understand more about where you're coming from. And people were like,
Yeah. And I
wait,
just, like,
what?
And I also think, this is a little aside, I think particularly in Delaware, like, part of the legislative psychology of some people is basic human psychology, where they're like, wow, you're working really hard. If I work that hard on something, I want my colleagues to support me.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's also part of the equation. But you know, I have found then, even while DC is different and the incentives are different,
Mm-hmm.
the same principle applies. And the same opportunity exists if you are willing to show respect. So take, for example, the treatment that I've received from some of my colleagues.
Mm-hmm.
It's a handful of folks, to be honest with you. They're a handful of professional provocateurs. They come at me, and I respond by quite literally saying, one of my favorite parts of being here for orientation is seeing in my colleagues on both sides of the aisle what voters in their districts value in them, and I hope my colleagues will do the same for me. It's not taking the bait and not giving these folks the response that I want. It's summoning some level of grace, both grace in the sense of calm on my end, but also grace in the sense of not lashing out at the people coming against me, trying to see even in the people who either are silent in the face of these attacks or even in some cases supportive of the attacks, trying to see the goodness in them. And that angered some folks in my own community, and quite frankly, the hardest part of all of this has been the lack of grace that I've gotten from people who I share a lot with, including my own identity. But a lot of my Republican colleagues, because of that reaction, they saw, okay, well, Sarah McBride is not what we thought she might be. She's not the caricature we thought. And it seems she's really serious. And because of her grace, it's clear she's willing to work with people who don't see eye to eye with her. She's not an absolutist. She's not an extremist. She is someone that we can engage with. And so a number of my Republican colleagues came up to me as a byproduct of my reaction and not only said, I'm so sorry, it's not Christian, this is inappropriate, welcome to Congress, but a number of them said, let's find opportunities to work together to show people that not everyone is like that here. And it resulted in me being the freshman who's introduced more bipartisan bills than any other freshman in Congress. And so it's a principle, but it's also a practice. Mm-hmm. And I have seen that it is a practice that results in being able to take lemons and turning it into lemonade.
Love it.
That's powerful.
So based on that, and from that vantage point, what do you think is the most underrated form of resilience in governing? How do you
life even? Yeah,
or life. I mean,
good for everybody.
There's winning the message and there's winning the votes, as you've said. So
yeah.
What is it? Is it patience? Is it persistence? Adaptability? If there's going to be a lot of people, I know we're not getting political. We're staying on the official side of the aisle, but there's a lot of new people. There's a chance you're going to have a lot of new colleagues in Congress, and people are coming out of this time period saying, I need to get in the arena too. For those new people, what do you say to them around, how to actually be effective, not just win elections, but actually govern when they get there?
So I think it's everything that you said, which I think fundamentally boils down to two things for me. The first is we are an instant gratification society.
Unfortunately.
And we tend to fall into, and social media incentivizes this, an all or nothing approach, if you are not 100% with me, then you are the enemy. We have no room for imperfect allies. We treat relationships as a tool to reward and punish people for being right or wrong, which then means that we then have conditioned ourselves to believe that if you are then in relationship with someone, because we view it as a tool to reward or punish, that by definition, that means you condone everything that the person that you are in a relationship with thinks or believes or says, instead of viewing those relationships as a starting point in an ongoing conversation to open hearts and change minds. And I think the first thing that all of us need to be willing to do is, even in the face of a information ecosystem that is by design forcing us to fall into cynicism and despair and hopelessness that persuasion is not possible, to, in the face of all of that, maintain our faith in other people. Democracy only works if you maintain your faith in other people's capacity to change. And not only is that the foundation of the democratic order, you also have to summon it in order to actually do it.
So true.
Because people can tell if you don't believe in them. People can tell if you think that they're a bad person, if you don't like them. And so you have to, I said this earlier, if we are to tap other people's better angels, you first have to see them. And sometimes that means, getting through the clouds.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it means really squinting your eyes to find it, but you have to find it.
Putting on your grace-colored glasses.
You put on your grace-colored glasses. And then the second thing I would say is, not only do we have to maintain our faith in other people's capacity to change, which sometimes requires effort, but the other thing is to sometimes we have to summonly conscious hope. Sometimes we have to consciously summon hope, excuse me. And I think we have fallen prey to thinking that hope is an organic emotion. And, that's partly a byproduct of this post-1960s world, when it felt like we were on this unending cultural wave of momentum that would result, with hard work and effort, into progress inevitably. That we could inevitably bend the arc of the moral universe if we simply worked for it. And that hope that was a byproduct of that sense of inevitability, we don't feel that anymore. We can't see the light at the end of the tunnel. We don't know that it feels like we don't know that if we work and share our stories and lift our voices and vote and volunteer, that things will work out. And it feels different than 20 or 30 years ago. And I have to remind myself, and I try to remind other people, that you cannot tell me that the reasons for hopelessness now are greater than the reasons for hopelessness for an enslaved person in the 1850s, or the reasons for hopelessness for an unemployed worker in the early days of the Great Depression. You cannot tell me that the reasons for hopelessness now are greater than the reasons for hopelessness for a closeted LGBTQ person in the 1950s who never knew of a country where they could live openly and authentically as themselves. And in this world where we have this instant gratification society, in this demand for absolutism that is only possible on the left or the right in authoritarianism, in this world where we have every force pulling us apart and telling us that everyone is against you, basically, we have to resist that and be willing to do the hard things, which might not be instantly satisfying, which might not instantly bear fruit. But sometimes we have to do the hard things. Sometimes we have to be willing to consciously summon that faith in one another and our hope in ourselves that we can do big things if we are going to actually do them and do them successfully.
Yeah, I mean, that's I think we definitely lose sight of that, and I think it's hard to find the balance in this world where you say, everything is sort of instant gratification, and attention matters a lot too. In that, if you're not grabbing attention, then there is no window to do a lot of the things that people need to do in campaigns, quite frankly, which is do some fundraise and get votes and earn votes, as it were. So that it doesn't leave as much room for doing those hard things, which takes nuanced conversation, discussion, like you said, squinting really hard sometimes to find the better angels in the people that you're working with. But how do you feel we can, as a society, find a better balance between needing to lean into that attention economy? Because there's so many structures built in that way that reward things that are shocking or anger inducing, or you name it, whatever. Open up your phone and flip through a couple reels, and you'll see this full spectrum of things. But how do you feel like we can rebalance the scales a little bit toward being able to have those nuanced conversations, maybe have them at a grander scale than just one-on-one in the room, which are also very necessary?
We're basically making a case for incrementalism. We would love to see people being more willing to accept some incremental wins as part of a larger journey than I need the big flashy thing now. And if you can't deliver the big flashy thing, you suck. And I'm going to go with someone else. And it's like, what? Like, that's not how.
Yeah, it's not how change comes. Frustratingly and unfortunately, and also fortunately, because the fact that we can't get everything we want in one foul swoop also means that hopefully that means the other people can't get everything they want in one foul swoop, right? It allows us all to live to fight another day. And I will just also say that, like, I want to be clear too that, like, seeing people's better angels, or being willing to see people's better angels, whether it's people in the public, which I think is profoundly necessary for us as elected officials to truly see and like everyone, or for that matter with our colleagues. It also doesn't mean being naive to the fact that for all of us, it's a struggle between our better angels and our base instincts, right? Or our better angels or our the demon on our shoulder, right? And that there are real times where that demon is winning out, right? There are real times where people who still are human beings, worthy of dignity, worthy of certain of inalienable rights, worthy of respect, that they're not inflicting harm on people, that they don't need to be held accountable or stood up to or fought, right? Like, we can hold all of those truths together, and we do that. I mean, we as people to the left of the political spectrum, like, we do that with people who commit crime, right? We should be able to hold that nuance of humanity and that human dignity within us when it comes to political disagreement. But I guess what I would say to your point, because attention is at this point currency in our society, and we can bemoan that reality, but we have to grapple with it, right? And we have to, especially in politics, we have to grapple with the fierce attention economy that we are in. And one way of getting attention is to be outrageous. It's to be extreme. It's to be absolutist. It's to be condemnatory. It's to be cynical, and to have the hot take. And one, not only do I just think that betrays genuine nuance that exists in this world, but just from a practical standpoint, it works far better for the other side than it does for us. When the right is extreme and shrill, or extreme and loud and angry and condemnatory, they're seen as strong. And when we are that way, we are seen as shrill and hysterical. What does that sound like? Yeah. It just doesn't work for us like it does them. And that means that we are at a competitive disadvantage in that attention economy, and we have to figure out a different way. All virality online stems from tapping people's curiosity. So one way of tapping people's curiosity is to be outrageous, right? It's to say the extreme thing. It's to catch their attention with something that they feel like they don't see every day. Something that either conforms to what they think totally, or is so outrageous on the other end that it catches their attention by catching their anger. But it fundamentally taps their curiosity. What are some other ways of tapping people's curiosity? I would say that we are not used to seeing people who disagree, people who live and look and think very differently from one another, having a civic dialogue and actually finding common ground. I think the person who does what I'm describing really well and has shown that you can go viral doing it is actually Zohran Mamdani. his first, and I know like everyone talks about like, but like his first video that he went viral for was him having conversations with many Trump voters and actually finding common ground with them. And it taps people's curiosity because people are not used to seeing that. People are not used to seeing a Muslim democratic socialist having a conversation with a gritty Trump supporter in Staten Island, and actually not only not screaming at one another, but finding common ground on things, right? People aren't used to seeing a 35-year-old transgender person having a civil dialogue with a center-right or conservative Republican, right? Like, these are unique things, and by definition, because of that uniqueness, they tap people's curiosity, and they tap people's curiosity in a constructive way for us, because they also combat, I think, one of the central challenges that the Democratic coalition has, which is that a lot of people think that we are judgy, and as a byproduct, do not like them.
We've had that conversation.
This is the conversation we have consistently.
Yeah, where it's like it's hard to, former, I'm like, I don't even know what to call him these days, Mayor Gov, Carney. But, as much as it drove me nuts, he would always say, like, it's about addition and not subtraction. To your point, to the extent that you can. Obviously, it's not a recipe for, subjecting yourself to harm. But to the extent we can, we are able to do big things and achieve these generational type changes where we look back and say, oh my gosh, we were there then, by getting a lot of people as part of the effort, versus, trying to shoulder something through in an authoritarian way with a small
wagging
group.
your way to,
And like, we're not going to get there by lecturing people and making them feel stupid, frankly. I mean, that's, I think, the hardest thing to try to, we work in the, energy and environmental space, and it's trying to find the messages that don't shame people for being confused about what they're supposed to do in the face of climate change.
It's complicated, right?
Yeah.
It is actually complicated.
It is complicated, but how do you, to your point, use curiosity and think about things that will pique people's interests and make them think differently about things without talking down to them or pretending like the answer's obvious.
Right.
Like, well, how could you not support this? What's wrong with you? It's like,
and we tried that. We tried that.
Yes.
We are not in this moment in our country because we weren't shaming people enough. We are not in this moment because we weren't canceling people enough. We are not in this moment because we weren't calling people bigots enough. We've tried that. It didn't work. And yes, people's grace, to come back to that word, has been abused in both the present and in the past. But the course correction to that cannot be to eliminate all grace from our politics. Grace is necessary for people to grow. And if people feel like you think they're a bad person, if people feel like they're going to be permanently guilty for having had one position, not only does that leave them no space to grow, not only does it remove the incentive for them to grow, it actually increases the incentive for them to maintain their position and guarantee that that position maintains its dominance in our politics. Because they don't want the opposite position to become the dominant position, because then they're going to be punished. And so it always surprises me how much of this is just like change making is not just intellectual. Change making is not just emotional. It is also relational. And if I can help do one thing in our politics right now, it's to uncondition us from this perspective that relationships are that tool to reward or punish, and to remind people something that I have seen in my own life as a trans person, but also something I have seen fighting for paid leave or a whole host of other bills, that the superpower we have as human beings is the power of our proximity. And when we are willing to be proximate with people, it doesn't mean we will change every heart and every mind But it does mean, through that power of our proximity, that we can win over certainly just enough, if not hopefully even more than just enough, to win the election and win the day and win that progress.
I mean, it's absolutely essential because, like, I mean, as you've said, what we did wasn't working, and so I think we have to figure out how to come back to that to that grace and apply that to these conversations and really get back into having that nuance and figuring out the relational piece of the persuasion puzzle. So I know we're coming up on just about 50 minutes and definitely want to. I mean, we could talk to you.
Yeah, we could stay here
all day. Yeah, but
We'll
you have
some time and continue this.
Yes, karaoke.
So we'll leave you with this question. So if you could tell maybe someone who's looking to get into the public arena, or really anyone who's looking to take that next step in their own personal journey, if you had one piece of advice for that person as they're trying to figure out how to have these more nuanced, persuasive conversations, how to navigate the complexities and quite frankly, turmoil of our reality today, what would that advice be to that person?
You know, I am in addition to some of the stuff we've already talked to, the summoning faith and summoning hope. So much of my life at this point is encapsulated in a line in Ted Lasso, which might be a quote from Walt Whitman of "Be curious, not judgmental."
Yeah.
Curiosity is such a beautiful gift. And when you allow yourself to go into any space with curiosity, you will live a more enriching life, a more productive life. You will bear witness to beauty and grace that you didn't know was possible. And you will unlock insights and perspectives that you might disagree with, but will give you such a deep understanding of the beauty of humanity that you will live a better life for it. And I just think all of us would be better off if, even when we feel like we have reasons to be judgmental, to be curious instead.
Amen to that.
That is so true. And we always love a good Ted Lasso quote.
Big fan. We are excited.
Always welcome.
We are excited for Ted Lasso to come back this summer.
Me too. And I'm rewatching the series right now for like the third time. But
Amazing.
One of the things, I'll close on this. One of my tricks when I was in the state legislature was I would have a Ted Lasso mug. And look, I'm not going to judge you if you haven't seen Ted Lasso. It's not your fault. You don't know what you don't know. But if a lobbyist complimented the Ted Lasso mug, I was like, if you're a Ted Lasso fan, there's something in you that's redeemable. There's something in you that's good.
Yeah, we have at least that. You have at least that common ground together.
Love that.
If you're not, you can't be too. If you like Ted Lasso, there's some goodness in your heart, and so
unless you like Rupert and Ted Lasso, and then
right, yeah, well,
it's like, who's your favorite? The follow-up question I have is, who's your favorite character in Ted Lasso?
Rupert was really misunderstood. Yeah, highly misunderstood. Yeah.
Then it's like, oh no.
Wow. Okay.
Strong answer. Where do we go from there?
I would have rather you not have watched Ted Lasso.
I know. Huh. It's like, if that's what you took away.
One guy, huh?
Yeah. What is it that you like about Rupert? See, you can always. I love that though. I think that's such a powerful, especially in this time where people are really afraid and trying to figure out where they go next. Using curiosity and trying to find just some kernel that you share with someone else as that opening, that crack in the door to potentially a relationship, to potentially finding that common ground, to that realizing that there is a way forward if we actually get curious and can figure out that path together versus trying to do it alone.
And in finding that, maybe we all will just be a little bit less miserable too. Wouldn't that be nice?
That would be
Amen.
lovely. Amen to that.
Less misery sounds pretty good right about now.
That's my 2026 motto. Less misery.
Perfect.
Especially a month in, it's like, oh, I guess we have to lower the bar even more. After 2020, I know a lot of people were like, 2025, what could happen? And then not to make light of, say in a joking manner, it's been a brutal beginning to the year. And thank you for your work. I know you are leading the charge on accountability. So curiosity and grace, as you mentioned earlier, does not trump accountability when people are causing harm. So thank you for leading that charge. And it's heartening to see more of your colleagues on board and leadership on board with those impeachment articles for Christine Ohm.
Thank you both.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Thank you for joining us.
It was so much fun.
Absolutely.
Always love seeing you. And thanks to your team for all the work to make you available. And we're jealous of your day in Sussex yesterday. We saw that. So we appreciate your time after a pretty jam-packed day.
Love a week when I get to spend a couple days down in Kenton, Sussex.
Thank you, Congresswoman.
Thank you, Congresswoman.
Thank you, friends.
See you soon. Bye.
A big thank you to our guest, Congresswoman Sarah McBride, for joining us on the Expect Chaos podcast. It was an incredible discussion.
She's amazing. I mean, she is one of those people from when I met her a lot younger for both of us that you just knew was destined for really cool things. And to have somebody like her be serving at this incredibly difficult time for our country, we are just so fortunate, not just as a Delawarean, but she's really doing things that I absolutely have a national impact and showing us all a way forward again during these extremely difficult times.
Absolutely. I think we all have a lot to learn from Congresswoman McBride, her commentary on grace and kind of applying that to life and different situations is really a beautiful thing, and I think quite helpful. And to her point, I think helps build resiliency in these very tumultuous times. So we certainly appreciate her making the time to come on our podcast here and talk with us a little bit and walk us through her process of how she does it every day, gets up every day and advocates for the things that she cares about every day, and
it makes an impact.
It makes a big impact. Yeah. Absolutely. So big thanks. And if you are enjoying a little plug for the podcast, so if you're enjoying the Expect Chaos podcast and the chaos is up to your standard, we would appreciate a subscribe on Substack, and feel free to leave a comment, share there. Also, you can, if so inclined, leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. So Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and the other places that you get podcasts. So anyway, feel free to leave a review if you're enjoying this. And
we appreciate it. And one last thing, just want to say another happy birthday to Beau Biden. He is missed, and I know if he were here right now, he'd be on the front lines making a difference. So happy birthday, Beau.
All right. Thanks all for listening. We'll catch you next time.
Thank you. Bye.